I should tell you that the one or two in the room who would know the last time I was here was actually on the day of the, and Charles was here, and was on the day of the blackout, and we had an event that we planned with members of the Portuguese community, and there were two things that were remarkable about the day, one much smaller in the life of the city than the other. The smaller one was that I had my brother with me from England who lives in England, has for about 20 years, and for some reason he had learned many years ago to speak Portuguese, and so he speaks Portuguese, French, and English, and so much to his horror, because he wasn't expecting me to do so, I asked him if he wanted to step up on the stage and make a speech in Portuguese, which he then proceeded to do. I'm not sure what he said about his brother, but in any event, the other part that was much more remarkable about the day, of course, was that we proceeded to have the event. It was at about 6 o'clock at night, and the blackout had started at about 4:30, and I guess none of us really knew what was going on, but notwithstanding that, I think probably 80 people showed up. We'd expected 150, and 80 people did show up to have the event. We had a good time. The fridges and the bar was all shut down, but some of the beer was still cold, and we had a very nice time here. So this place has very special memories of a very historic day in the life of the city. Can I begin by just saying a word of thanks and acknowledging the presence of quite a few people who are helping in my campaign that have come out this morning, as I had the chance to be with you from the media. And they're sitting here mainly in the front row, one or two at the back. Raoul Bardwaj, Rosa Chan, Gwyneth Chapman, Bahadur Madhani, who's going to be coming, he's late, Jack Prazeres, Charles Souza, Ki Hun Yi, Wajid Khan, and Liberty Silver, all of whom are people that have been very involved as co-chairs and leaders in my campaign. And I want to acknowledge as well the presence of Andy Manahan and Tony Diniso. I don't see Tony. Oh, there he is right there, and Andy's back there. So I just want to say thank you to them for coming out, and to you, ladies and gentlemen in the media, for being here as well. This is really just an opportunity for me to spend some time with you and to update you on some of the things that have been going on in the life of my campaign and in my own life in the last 2 weeks since we last met. The campaign has become, as I think many suspected it would, a very tight race. I think we've come a very long way, but we still have a long way to go. As you know, there are 17 days left, and in politics that's almost an eternity. Just prior to coming here today, I made an announcement at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton opposing what I call the Manhattanization of Toronto. Developers these days are building tall and they're building big. And while that approach fits in quite nicely downtown, it doesn't work so well where these massive developments are built very close to established neighborhoods. Many neighborhoods, particularly those north of the Bloor Danforth subway line, and particularly the ones that are in the core of the city, the real downtown core, or north of the downtown core, are dealing with proposals that would bring skyscrapers right to their doorstep. And fighting these massive new developments and going to the OMB is very expensive for these neighborhood groups. In many cases, they have to go and hire lawyers and hire other kinds of planners and consultants to go and fight to protect their own neighborhoods in front of the Ontario Municipal Board. And so I said this morning that I thought there were at least 4 things that I could do as mayor and lead in the process of doing if I was elected that would help neighborhoods, frankly, to push back and to make sure that they had more muscle to kind of help control the scale and the size of developments that took place nearby to them. The first was to demand from the province the power to override OMB decisions by a 2/3 majority of Toronto City Council within 30 days of a decision, so that if there was a decision with which our elected representatives disagreed at the Ontario Municipal Board, ultimately our elected officials would have the last word if 2/3 of them voted to overturn the decision of the OMB. And that rests on a footing that to me is fundamental to our democratic process, namely that elected officials should have the last word on these things. The people we elect should be accountable for decisions that affect neighborhoods. Secondly, I said I would institute secondary plans, neighborhood plans, for all of the neighborhoods in the city. Our new official plan is good, but it doesn't go far enough. It says we should be having intensification of development in the city along the transit lines and so on, but it doesn't say that intensification would mean something quite different at Oakwood and St. Clair than it would mean at Bay and Bloor, or than it would mean at Yonge and Eglinton, or than it would mean at McCowan and Shepherd in Scarborough. And so I think we need to have those neighborhood plans that take into account the distinct and unique character of neighborhoods across the city. Thirdly, to establish a mandatory process by which neighborhoods and developers work together on developments from the very beginning. Right now, as many of you will know, there is a requirement that neighborhoods and developers have to have one meeting, and that they have to sort of prove that they've had that one meeting. Well, oftentimes what happens is that meeting becomes a very kind of pro forma thing. It doesn't really mean much, and I think what we have to have is a very substantial series of discussions that really address the issues before anybody even comes down to City Hall to file an application, so that we would know when those applications come in that a number of the neighborhood issues are on the table. Many of them, I think, can be resolved before an application is even put in. I think it will reduce the number of these big fights that neighborhoods have with developers and lead to much more productive development process. And finally, I've said that I think we have to really take a page from the book that's been written in the Leaside neighborhood over in just the east side of the old city of Toronto in East York, and put out very detailed guidelines, as they have done, that help preserve the architectural and other character of neighborhoods. And in this case, they put out guidelines that say what you can do when you renovate your house, what you can't do, what we expect in terms of standards. If you're going to build a new house, tear the old one down and build a new one. Here's what it has to look like, so that it doesn't interfere with the existing character of those neighborhoods. You know, I said this morning at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton, and I repeat to you that I think the model we should be adopting as we go forward, because we do have to develop the city. We have to develop the city. We're going to have 1 million more people living here over the next 20 years, and as we grow and renew the city, we have to develop. But I think the model should be more what we see in places like Amsterdam and Paris and Geneva, where you see very smart-looking 6 to 8 story development that has commercial and retail at the street level and has residential above it. You don't see what a lot of the times people present here, which is huge skyscrapers that go 50 stories tall, especially right on the border of existing neighborhoods. And I think that that should be our model. Europe should be more of our model than is New York, where New York's a wonderful city, but I think probably a lot of us would recognize many reasons why we don't want Toronto to become a Manhattan. Another problem I've dealt with since we last met is the problem of gridlock. I think it's something that is plaguing the people of Toronto. I think it takes an emotional toll on people as they have to sit in their cars and time is spent away from their families and so forth and so on. But I think there's also, I think many of us would recognize, a huge economic cost, with millions of dollars being lost by salespeople and business people and all kinds of professional people sitting in their cars not able to get to the kinds of appointments that they have to get to. I think it also, of course, adds to our environmental problems. A lot of smog is created by cars sitting idling in traffic jams, and this is not a good thing. And so in an attempt to get Toronto moving again, I announced my Green Light Toronto plan. And this is a plan that is announced intended to ease gridlock in the short term and have the Mayor of Toronto resume a traditional leadership role in helping to decide regional transportation issues over the longer term. And so I said I would do a number of things as mayor, including replacing the antiquated traffic computer that was put in many years ago to help synchronize the traffic lights around the city, add more advanced green signals and the green arrow signals and have them running more of the day so people can turn left in intersections that are very busy, more of the reversible lanes we see on Jarvis Street. I don't know how many of you use Jarvis Street, but there is one lane that goes south when the traffic is going south in the morning, and then it switches and is used for northbound traffic in the afternoon. Better coordinate Toronto's road maintenance schedule. You know, it seems like every year, year after year, we make the same mistake and we tear up all the north-south roads at the same time and make sure that there's absolutely no way to get anywhere. And we don't do the construction on kind of an organized basis where maybe you do in one year, a certain street, and the next year you do the next street over that's north-south, and so you wouldn't have them all torn up at the same time. More communication and better planning. You know, oftentimes we don't even tell people that certain roads are torn up, so they're trying to get around the city and they all go somewhere where if they knew, they would not use that route, or they might even decide to take transit, which many of them probably should be encouraged to do anyway. I would explore the possibility of banning delivery trucks on certain streets during certain hours. You have to be careful about this because people have deliveries to make and the businesses need to have those deliveries, but at the same time, there's reason to believe in some cases you can take a look at saying, look, could you try to sort of segregate it in a certain period of time during the day as opposed to another? And I think there's reason to be able to discuss that as they've done in New York and in London. Construct more neighborhood-friendly Toronto parking authority lots across the city. Allow Metro Pass holders to get on both the back and the front door of the bus on an honor system. Because what you have now in many cases with the streetcars and the buses is long lineups of people waiting to get on the front door only to show their Metro Pass, which they've already purchased. there's some danger in this, that maybe you're going to have some people get on and not pay. But I think at the end of the day, most people are people who live their lives in good faith and wouldn't want to do such a thing. So these are important first steps aimed at offering Toronto drivers some relief and some hope, because I think in recent years there's really been nobody. It's interesting that both Barbara Hall and David Miller said of my proposals to relieve gridlock, well, these are old ideas. We've been talking about these ideas for years. And I smiled when I heard that, because I thought to myself, well, if you've been talking about them for years, how come you've never done them? And that's a large part of the problem in this city, is that people have been talking about a lot of things for years and they've never done anything about it. And so I intend to go down to the City Hall and get these things done for people, because they're saying, look, yes, that's the point. Everybody's been doing a lot of talk at City Hall, and nobody's been doing a lot of act. Mr. Miller has recently said that his answer to some of our transportation issues is to put tolls on the Gardiner Expressway and the Don Valley Parkway. I guess last night on 680 News, or the latest installment, he said that he talked to Premier McGuinty and now he decided he wasn't going to put tolls on. I just warn the people of Toronto very simply this. He's talked about this, he's thought about this, he was given at least 10, if not 100 opportunities over the last week to back down from his position, including by me on the televised debate last week. And every time he said, no, I think it's the responsible thing to do to say that I might bring in tolls. And now suddenly, last night as a result of a conversation he could have had any time with Mr. McGuinty, he's saying, oh, no, the idea is dead. Well, when an idea is that long in somebody's head and alive for that long, believe me, it hasn't just gone away. I'm opposed to road tolls because they would cost the average person that's driving their car in and out of the city each day, from Etobicoke and Scarborough and North York, $1,200 a year. And perhaps even worse than the monetary cost to people is that studies have shown in other cities that when you put these tolls on roads that previously were free, you divert about half the traffic into residential streets, because people say, I don't want to pay the toll, I'm going to drive down some other street. We don't need that traffic in our neighborhoods. The kids don't need it. They're trying to play on the sidewalks and on their front yards. The families don't need it. The properties don't need it in terms of just the traffic. There's enough traffic in our neighborhoods now. Something we're going to have to move ahead with in the next number of years that I've also dealt with since we last spoke is the need to revitalize our film industry. This is a huge industry that employs thousands of people, and it's not just people who are directors and producers, it's people who supply the food, the people who supply the trailers, the people who do a lot of the work on building the sets and so forth. This is a big industry. And since SARS and since we've kind of taken our eye off the ball a bit, we've lost millions of dollars in production, and that costs us thousands of jobs. Probably each and every one of you have run into somebody who've said maybe this summer they had to go to Montreal or Winnipeg or Hamilton to work on a production because there weren't enough productions going on here. And so I've taken, again, announced some very specific measures to move the Film Development Office back into the Mayor's office so I can give it the clout that it needs to get things done. We've got to cut through the red tape. They tell me now that if you want to go and look at a subway station for the purposes of maybe doing a film shoot in the subway station, you have to apply for a permit, and it takes 10 days, and you have to pay for the permit just to go and look at the subway station, not to use it, just to look at it to see if you want to use it. We can't do this kind of thing. People will just say, look, I can go get my film done somewhere else and bring all the jobs to another city. We have to modernize our production facilities in Toronto, and this is an important thing to do because our competitors, Montreal, New York, and others, are modernizing their production facilities. We have to put the city on sale for a 6-month period and say things like the 15% charge that they add on to the police bill for police that are needed during productions. We're going to do away with that, and for 6 months, for anybody who books their shoot here, we'll do away with that charge so we can make it a bit cheaper and more friendly to do business here. And I've said that I personally would become an ambassador for Toronto in the places where people make decisions about where to make films and television productions, because we need those people to come to the city. We need those jobs. We need that activity here. We have developed a whole industry, a whole group of people who make their lives doing this now. And I also think it's a part of the city having a soul, that we have a healthy arts and cultural community, and the film industry is very much a part of that, that it helps creative people to be able to do their work here and to be able to kind of live the kind of life and be in the kind of environment that they need to be in. And we're going to do a number of other things, including getting rid of some of the unfavorable tax treatment that is in place from the other governments to discourage, actually, or encourage people to produce films outside of Toronto. And this just isn't right. This is the economic engine of Canada and of Ontario. I've, of course, participated over the last couple of weeks since I saw you last in a number of debates, including the televised debate on city television, which I found a very interesting experience. I didn't really like what it caused you to have to do in terms of speaking when other people were speaking, but I guess you had the option of either speaking when they were speaking and hoping you might get heard, or just standing there silent and waiting for them all to finish, and you might have been waiting all night. So it was an interesting experience for me. It was the first time that I've ever done that. I'll just say one last thing before concluding and answering your questions. I had a very interesting meeting yesterday with the Toronto Star editorial board, and as often is the case at those editorial boards, they question you for a couple of hours on just about every subject you could imagine. And they said to me, yes, a copy that's right here, and they said to me, what would be the single thing that I would be proudest of if I could only serve one term as mayor, and at the end of that term I either had to be retired or I was defeated or some such thing. Because I had said to them that I was going to serve only 2 terms no matter what, because I think that's the right way these things should be done. You should serve 2 terms and then make way for somebody new. And I said that I thought my proudest accomplishment, because it's the one that I'd really want to focus on making sure I made some progress on, would be to, let me just borrow your newspaper for a minute, because I'd like to maybe read you the words. Thank you. I said that, and it's quoted, I think, in the Royce and James column here. Well, it says that I talked about the scandal of poor Rexdale neighborhoods with tiny, overused community centers, while middle-class neighborhoods have ample facilities. Talked about crime and disenchantment and a loss of hope in neighborhoods where kids stop dreaming just when their futures are supposed to begin. And then just to quote here, I said that if I could just accomplish one thing as Toronto's next mayor, it would be to turn around the lives of tens of thousands of people who live in the city's poorest neighborhoods. We would go in with vigor and attack this despair, this disadvantage that has caused people to stop dreaming when they turn 11 instead of starting to dream. There was one other. Anyway, I can't find the one thing here, but I said that that we had to work at every aspect of what goes on in those neighborhoods, starting with affordable housing, working through proper programs and facilities for kids and families in those neighborhoods to make sure that they can have not only the same kind of opportunity and the same kind of facilities, but probably they need a bit of an extra hand up in terms of getting them off to a good start and making sure that they're given treatment, and that we have to work very hard at police-community relations in those communities, because I guess something that I've been saying all this week at a number of the debates, and some of you have been there, is that of the most multicultural city in the world, more is expected. And I think that one of the things, and I'll just finish on this note, that we've been guilty of in the city, and that I really want to see addressed, is I think we were the cleanest city in North America, and then I guess we started reading too many of our own clippings and talking about it too much, and we forgot to actually do something to keep it that way. And the next thing we started to talk about was we were the safest city in North America, and we were all talking about that. And while we were sort of talking about it and bragging about it and boasting about it and reading all the articles written about it, we became a little less safe. And now I think that the risk we run is that we're going to talk about how we're the most multicultural city in the world, and that's a fact. But it shouldn't just be a fact, it should be a way of life. And I think that what we have to do over the next number of years is to make sure that we sort of make sure it's something that we can be very proud of, that we live the life of the most multicultural city in the world, which sets an example for the rest of the world in a whole lot of different ways. And it's not just about those neighborhoods where there is despair and disadvantage, but I think many of you would know that some of the newcomers to Canada are people that are the ones that are living in the greatest numbers in many of those neighborhoods that are disadvantaged, and that's something that we have to address. So I'll just finish on that note and tell you that I'm looking forward to the next 17 days, and I'm looking forward obviously to November the 10th. It's been a long campaign, but I said to the Star editorial board yesterday, it has been a privilege for me to run for public office, because you learn a lot about yourself, and you certainly learn a lot about your city and the great opportunity the city has, and what a magnificent group of people that you meet, and how warmly you're received everywhere you go, everywhere. From the mosque in Scarborough to the synagogue in Midtown to the Hindu temple in the North End, I have been received everywhere with a warmth and an openness and a willingness to listen that you couldn't have imagined. And so I'm now ready to answer your question. The third one I've been visiting with the Portuguese community is more, they're issues that really are much the same as for a number of other communities. They're talking about how we have to be more sensitive to the needs of small business, for example. Small business has been hurt by excessive levels of taxation. Small business has been hurt by huge amounts of red tape at the City Hall. Small business has been hurt by insensitive decisions that are made without their consultation on things we do about parking and so forth. and garbage and how we handle garbage. And so what I've heard probably most when I have been in the Portuguese community is that small business really has to be given more consideration in making a lot of decisions. I would say if there's a second thing that I've heard, and I've heard this in many communities across the city, and it's caused me to make specific allowance in my program for this, is that there is a lack of community facilities for people. There's a very well developed, well energized, very strong community sense in the Portuguese community, but what there isn't is the kind of opportunity for them to have facilities within their community to conduct programs and to have people gather together and enjoy those activities together. And this is something that is echoed in a lot of different communities across the city, and it's why I've made a specific provision. The provision I've made isn't enough to address all of the needs, but it is there to decide on what are the most appropriate priorities. I have said that these should be addressed to the most needy neighborhoods in the city, and that probably wouldn't, frankly, capture the Portuguese community, because the Portuguese people have been very industrious since they came here 50 years ago, and probably don't, in most cases, fall into that category. But it certainly is something that I think they've told me that they would like to see addressed. And I think, finally, the other thing I've heard from members of the Portuguese community, because they are people who are industrious, hard-working people, is they want to make sure that we build things in the city. They want to make sure that we're a city that's on the move, not standing still. And that means making sure we attract good jobs and good investments, and then it means we make sure we make investments here, that we're building transit, and that we're keeping our infrastructure up, and so on. So if I had to sort of say that what I'd heard in my visits with different elements of the Portuguese community, those would be the things that I'd probably say I've heard. I didn't know about the particular issue you talked about, but I think that kind of idea is precisely the kind of thing that we have to do much more of in the city. I think we have for years, rested on 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe half a dozen very successful events we do. Even there, I think we have underinvested in things like Caravana and Pride and so on, and we just take them for granted. Again, we're running the same risk of doing exactly what we've done in so many other areas, which is take these things for granted, just assume they happen every year, and not continue to invest in them to make them bigger and bigger and better and make sure they're on a very solid footing. But I think at the same time we have to invent new things, and they're not just for tourists to come into the city, but they're for people here to come and be with each other and do business. One of the things that I like about your idea of having a festival at that time of year is that it also, I think, increases the understanding that people have. I had the opportunity to go to one at the Easter season because it was during the beginning period of the campaign, and I've forgotten just momentarily the name of the organization that puts it on. I was thinking it's the Folk Arts Council, and I'm not sure that's correct. But it was very interesting for me because I was able to see that Easter, which is obviously not celebrated by everybody, but Easter, as it is celebrated by many different cultures, is celebrated quite differently, and you can see the different kinds of things that people have, the different foods they eat. Even I, as a person who's running for mayor, was educated. You always learn something every day, and I think the notion of people coming together at the City Hall and seeing how different people celebrate their different faiths at this time of year, meaning the latter part of the year, I think would be very helpful. I mean, there's no reason, even though Ramadan will have passed, where you couldn't have something that sort of indicates that what was going on with Ramadan and with the Hanukkah and Christmas and all the different things, and turn it into something that I think could be economically beneficial, a fun thing, brings people together at the City Hall and celebrates. To me, the last reason in the world why those things should not, if people don't want to come to those things, that may be a reason why it shouldn't happen. But the last reason in the world why these things shouldn't happen is because the City Hall is charging fees to people to say, sorry, these facilities you built and paid for already, you're going to have to pay for again. It's just like the road tolls to me. And so I'd be quite happy if I'm elected mayor on November the 10th to look at that kind of thing immediately and just say, as far as I'm concerned, we have to find a way to encourage these things to happen, not discourage them through financial penalties. And I think it's an excellent idea. We had a debate at one of the Muslim organizations. We had a debate at the Trinidad and Tobago Association, and we had another debate with members of the black community up in northwest Toronto on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday night. And at all 3 occasions I said, first of all, I would have zero tolerance as mayor, and it's part of my job as the leader of the city to make sure that people understand we are not going to have and we can't have. And it isn't going to happen because I say it's going to be so. What I have to do is show the leadership to bring people together and say, what makes us really, in reality, the most multicultural city in the world is that we understand each other, we accept each other for our differences as well as for what we have in common, that we're going to celebrate those differences. We're going to understand them first and celebrate them second, and that we're not going to allow it to go on in our community, the kind of stereotyping that can lead to a Muslim woman walking down the street with a head covering on and being given abuse because she's associated with terrorism, or a Jewish person finding they have security guards at their synagogues during the high holidays, or a member of the Chinese community finding they were frankly shunned by many members of the community during SARS, or a member of the African Canadian community who's a successful person driving his Lexus and being stopped 3 times on a Saturday night for no reason, really at all. And these are things where we have to say, we're not just going to issue orders, we're not just going to write memos saying you can't do it. What you have to do is create the kind of understanding in the community that this is something that is totally inconsistent with the kind of citizenship that all of us value so much in the City of Toronto. But I think you do have to go a step beyond that. And you have to show that you're starting to reach out to people on things like jobs and business and so on that are much more solid, tangible things people can see and can feel. And that is why I have said, for example, that with respect to communities that are presently underrepresented in the city public service, that I will make sure we take job fairs out to the community, so you don't wait around for people in those communities that are underrepresented to figure out how to apply for a job at City Hall, that you take the jobs out in job fairs. And I cite all the time the example of the mosque that's up by the airport near the Sears store there, where they've had a job fair the last 2 years, and they brought the governments and the private sector out to the mosque. And in 2002, they placed 1,300 people in a 2-day job fair, and this year they placed 2,300 people in jobs. So it proves that when you bring the jobs out, you're going to find 2 things. First of all, people are going to find job opportunities they didn't know exist, and lo and behold, the employers are going to find skilled people in that mosque that they didn't know existed either. And I think if you bring the 2 together, as often as not, the employer and the employee are going to say, we're a good match for each other. And it doesn't matter whether a person's Muslim or black or Chinese or Jewish, it doesn't matter. What matters is you get the skill set and the people brought together, and most of the time that's going to result in a match, and the people are going to get the jobs. I think that in the city government, that's something I do. I've also made it very clear that where we have to do better in terms of having a representative public service for the city, I would go in there and first measure. The first thing you have to do is go in there and measure. You're not measuring because you're going to establish quotas, because I think quotas can produce a negative reaction quite often. You're measuring because you want to know how representative is the city's workforce. And then once you've measured and you've discovered areas where there are shortcomings and where different parts of the community are dramatically underrepresented, then you put some policies in place and some programs, and then you measure again every year. Every year you measure again, and you issue a report card saying, how are we doing? How are we doing? Have we made some progress? Because I think most people in most of the communities in the city that are underrepresented would say, we don't expect the problem to be solved overnight. We do expect you to be measuring, we do expect you to be reporting on it, and we do expect to see some progress. And I've certainly committed myself as well that in the appointments that I have the ability to influence or to make as the Mayor of Toronto, I'm going to make sure that those appointments are representative of our community. Again, as I said earlier, if you're the most multicultural city in the world, more is expected of you. If you're the mayor of the most multicultural city in the world, more is expected of you. I can promise you I will show that kind of leadership. One of the first meetings I've said I'm going to have in my office, and this is not meant to exclude anybody else from consideration, but there's an event coming up that is crucially important to the life of the city next summer. And I can tell you within weeks, if not days, of my being elected mayor, I'm going to have the leaders of the Caravana organization into my office and say, now how can I help you to go and contact people in the business community who have not had the opportunity, nor have they often been invited to step up and support this hugely successful and important event in the life of our city. I want to get those people involved with this because they should be involved. They would enjoy and benefit from being involved. You would enjoy and benefit from their involvement. I can make that happen. And it's the kinds of bridges that you have to build between the community and other parts of the community that I think I can do as the mayor. And so that's one of the first things I'd be doing, because you have to do it in January. It's too late to do it in July. So I'm very committed to this, because I think it is a part of making sure that what we take pride in now, and that we don't fall into the same trap we did with the cleanest city and the safest city, and we make sure that 3 years from now, that we'll be able to say we really have stitched this community closer together as opposed to seeing it come further apart. I said at the black community debate up in the northwest corner of the city the other night, I want to be a mayor where you're not going to be sitting here 3 years from now at the next all candidates debate saying, here we are again discussing the same old issues for the 947th time and no progress has been made. Because I think that's what's been going on. There have been people standing up saying, I've been in politics for 20 years, elect me. I understand these issues better because I've been around for 20 years, elect me. And I said, that isn't the question. The question is, what results have been achieved? And what I want to stand in front of people with pride and say in 3 years is, look at what we've achieved. We haven't solved the entire problem. We haven't suddenly overnight made all these things either go away or come to pass. But we've made solid, measurable progress. And that is what I intend to be measured on in every area of the city's life. I've talked about all those things this morning, but let me summarize. I mean, I think that if you really want to make sure people have a fair chance to take advantage of the sense of hope and opportunity they feel when they come to a city like Toronto, you have to make sure they have, first of all, affordable housing. And we've not been addressing that for the last number of years in the city. You have to make sure they have programs that help them to integrate into the city. And frankly, Toronto is being badly shortchanged by the federal government. We get 34% of the money for immigrant settlement funding, and we have 50% of the immigrants that come to the city. It's not right, and I'm going to fight to see that it's changed, because that money goes to fund language programs, goes to fund short-term programs to help people update their skills, goes to help them provide them with some short-term assistance when they first get here. I think that we have to address the whole business of foreign professional accreditation. I mean, and I started to do some work on this as one of the founders of the City Summit, where we actually got business and the professions and government to sit down at the table together and say, why is it that, as a woman from Brazil was telling me the other day, who's a doctor, trained in Brazil, had practiced for a number of years, that it will take her 3 years to become a doctor in Toronto, whereas it would take her 6 months in the United States? There's no reason for that, other than just the inertia and the bureaucracy and whatever else, the policies of the medical profession. Well, I'm not saying I want to sort of get into a fight with them, but I do want to call them down to the table and say, look, I keep hearing people saying we need more doctors in Ontario. We have doctors here who are well trained. Imagine if we sent an Ontario doctor down to Brazil, and it was written up in the Toronto papers that that doctor was told they'd have to wait 3 years because their skills weren't quite up to par. We'd all say, what are they talking about? You know, that's a good Ontario doctor. Well, you know, why are we assuming that a doctor from Brazil is not a good Brazil doctor, or from anywhere else? I met another woman from India. She was probably in her 50s, if I had to guess. I didn't ask her age, it's not polite. But she was probably in her 50s, and she'd been a medical doctor in India for many years and then had practiced in London for 5 years. Same story. She gets here to Toronto, and they're telling her it's going to be 2 to 3 years before she can practice medicine here. Imagine if we sent a doctor from Ontario either to England or to India, and they were told, well, I'm sorry, we're not quite sure about your skills. We're going to have to take 3 years to sort that out. And if that was published in the paper back here, we'd be outraged. We'd say, well, that's a disgrace. And so I don't understand why we have this double standard. And so I think that's another thing we have to do, so that people who come here with skills, which quite often they now do, I mean, because our immigration system is very focused on making sure we have people that are coming with the right sets of skills, can use those skills. And then finally, I would say other programs in the community. So affordable housing. Childcare, we've got to free up the money that's been given by the federal government to the province to put more childcare into Toronto, because people, and you know what else? It's another example of what I was talking to this gentleman about. One of the things I think I can do as mayor is to speak to people in the business community and say to them, stop thinking about childcare as some kind of a welfare program. It's not a welfare program. It's an investment in the development of children.
That's right.
And it's an investment in a sound future for these children to have proper child care. And I think if a lot of business people are now focusing on that as they see more and more of the reports talking about how crucially important it is in those early years for children to have the right kind of care. And I think if they looked at it that way, they would realize that in the end, the investment we're making in child care is for the benefit of the children, it's for the benefit of the parents, but it's also for the benefit of the entire economic system, because it's going to produce better people who have a better chance to themselves be successful going forward because they had a good start. And so child care, immigrant settlement funding, foreign accreditation, accreditation of foreign accreditation, these are things that I think if you address them aggressively, and then programs right in the community themselves. I said yesterday at the Star editorial board, and I think I read the quote out of the paper this morning, it's doesn't make sense to me that, you know, in the neighborhoods that need the most programs and the most facilities to make sure people get off to a good start and have a chance, that we seem to have the least adequate facilities. It's just backwards. And so I've actually put money into my financial program to address that in the first year. You know, I've been around politics as a campaign advisor for many years, sir, and I guess I have come to understand very well that you know, the only time you want to be ahead in the polls is at about 9:15 p.m. on November the 10th. The rest of it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, if I was standing here today with 17 days to go and I was 25 points behind, I would have a hard time sort of smiling and saying, "Don't worry, it's all going to, you know, come to pass. It's, you know, I've got a strategy worked out." But I'm not. I'm in the thick of a race that is very exciting, that involves 3 people that are within a few points of each other. I can sense, as a result of the policies and announcements and some of the press coverage that you've seen today that I'm getting, that people are figuring out who I am and what I'm about and why I'm running, and that they're coming to my side. And so polls are polls. The day you want to be ahead is the day of the election. Any time before that, it runs a certain danger of peaking too soon, as they say. I'll take one more question, if there is one. Okay, yes. You had to. Look, I appreciate that. One of the things that you all know that you're welcome to attend any of the events that I have, and you're all invited to all the announcements, but I wanted to have some specific sessions that we've done twice now, and I'm happy to do it again, and I'll continue to do it as mayor, where there may be things that you want to address that are a little bit different. And I want to say two things, just to maybe by way of a closing answer or reply to your kind comment. The first is, I only wish I could speak 150 languages, because it's not so much for the journalists, to be frank. I'd love to be able to do the interviews, but I went up canvassing yesterday with Mike Feldman in an area where a lot of the members of the Russian community in Toronto live, and fortunately I had a young man with me who spoke Russian, and again, it was just another interesting story in the city of the size and the the depth of the Russian community. But I was in a mall, and we were talking, and I'd say probably 60% of the people we came to speak to spoke Russian, and we had very nice encounters, but it had to be done through someone else who spoke the language, and that's fine, but I would have felt more comfortable if I could have spoken to them directly myself.
We just have to learn English faster.
Well, no. You know what? The obligation's on me to learn Russian too. But the other thing I want to say is this: I think I've mentioned this to you before, but those of you who don't know, I spent a long time as the head of Rogers Media, working in particular, and I don't want to sort of say anything, mention an outlet that's a competitor to some of you, but I spent a long time responsible for what was then called CFMT, and I learned a very important lesson there. Because as much as we knew that the programs we had on that television station, whatever language they might be in, were watched by tens and tens and tens of thousands of people, when we went out to sell advertising, none of the advertisers really would give us any credit for that. They'd say, well, when we look at the ratings here, it doesn't show up. Where are the people? And we'd say, well, the ratings often don't show up because those people don't participate in the interviews as easily, because maybe they don't speak the language as well or whatever. And so we were forced to go out and spend a huge amount of money to do research that we had to do to prove, and we did the research in the language of the people that we were broadcasting to, and we proved when we did the research that, there were huge numbers of people watching these programs. And then some of the advertisers would say, okay, well, on the basis of that, we'll buy the ads. And in other instances, I know members of the sort of the press and media that operate in different languages hold events to prove, just by putting an ad in their paper or by putting something on their radio station, that hundreds of people will show up, and it proves they must be out there, otherwise how would they know? But we have to get over that. I've come to understand, for example, in the Tamil community, that they basically have a daily newspaper because they have several newspapers that publish once a week, all on different days of the week, and they're hugely read. Everybody reads them. In the Russian community, I think there's, three newspapers, and there's a very fine-looking directory that's put out of businesses and so on. I mean, this is another thing you learn as you have this privilege of running for public office, is that there are, there's a huge industry of people who are communicating with one another in the community that are not, not the mainstream press. And I have great respect for the Toronto Star and CFTO and CFRB and all those other people, but we've got to understand that there are other ways in which lots of people in this community get their information. In fact, I know that I now have learned, if I didn't know it before, that there are many people in this community who never read the Toronto Star, but who read your papers cover to cover every week, who watch your television programs and listen to your radio broadcasts. And that's just a part of the magnificent city that's so multicultural. But it's part of also recognizing the way the city works. And I knew it before because I'd been in the business, and I knew of the struggles that you go through to get the ad dollars and get the recognition. I understand it even better now, because what I also know is when I stand here and communicate with you, people tell me, when I see them in the street, yes, I saw you on, in the Russian newspaper, I saw you on the Portuguese television program, I saw you on Korean television, and I know how many people are watching, because you get the feedback instantaneously, probably faster than most of the other media in the city. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it very much.